Evening, everyone, and welcome to Asia House. My name's Anna Temby, and I'm the Literature Programme Manager here. This event is in partnership with London Book and Screen Week, which comes under the umbrella of the London Book Fair. The fair's market focus for 2019 is Indonesia, so we are delighted to welcome Indonesia's designer, writer, and digital influencer, Dian Pelangi, who's joining us from Indonesia. And I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating conversation tonight. Joining Dianne will be Professor Rena Lewis, Coulsum Patel, and Raishma Islam. Our chair for this evening is journalist and broadcaster Remona Aly. I'd like to give a very special thanks to the National Organising Committee for Indonesia as market-focused country at the London Book Fair, to Begcraft, the Indonesian Creative Economy Agency, and also to the Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia to the United Kingdom and Ireland for their support in this event tonight. There's going to be a chance for you to ask questions to our panelists at the end of the event, and we're going to finish with a short fashion presentation of some modest outfits from Dian Pelangi and Reshma's collections. So I'm going to pass over to Remona Aly, our chair for this evening, who's going to introduce our speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and good evening to you all. Well done for braving the gale force winds today. It's great that you all managed to make it here for our wonderful event. It's always a little bit stressful for me to know what to wear when you're chairing a panel of fashion gurus, but I really hope you will overlook my attempt at style and focus instead on the global phenomenon that is modest fashion. You may have seen hijab iterations on the catwalk by Gucci and Versace, or maybe you've seen a full-length dress on the high street at Marks & Spencer or H&M, who launched their first modest collections last year. It all points towards a real hunger for modest fashion that's been building over the years. But it's nothing new in countries like Indonesia that has been holding fashion shows for decades. And of course, it has something to do with the young female digital influencers as well, who have really made major brands sit up and pay attention to these influencers who are creating a complete movement. So no doubt, modest fashion is magnetic. And to delve into the many layers of it, we have some cutting-edge experts here. Did you like my puns? To my right, we have Professor Rena Lewis, who is basically like the grand spiritual master of modest fashion. She really is. Rena is the Centenary Professor of Cultural Studies at London College of Fashion, University of the Arts, London. She's a frequent media commentator and has a library of books to her name, including Muslim Fashion, Contemporary Style Cultures, and Modest Fashion, Styling Bodies, Mediating Faith. She was recently the consulting curator for an incredible exhibition in San Francisco called Contemporary Muslim Fashions, and that was in the Fine Art Museums, which hopefully she might talk about a little bit later in the discussion. And next to Rena, we have Coulson Patel, who is the director and co-founder of Ayah, a modest fashion consultancy service. And she's the former CEO of Ayah Couture, a luxury couture bridal brand. Actually, a bridal band would seem really cool. Bridal brand. And Coulson was also the buying director for a UK-based international importer and distributor of retail clothing, and was the liaison for stakeholders in East Asia, so she knows her business. Next to Coulson, we have Reshma, who trained as a couturier in French, but it's couturier, I think, in English. Reshma opened her fashion house 18 years ago, and it has since developed into multiple international fashion labels. Maintaining a bespoke and bridal service, Reshma launched online at John Lewis and House of Fraser in 2016, and she currently retails with stockists across the Middle East, Australia, India, and the USA. And also Reshma and first of all, Dian Pelangi, we are very, very thrilled to have her. She's literally stepped off a plane a couple of days ago, so we're hoping that she is not jet-lagged. Dian is an Indonesian designer and a digital influencer who is pushing the boundaries of modest fashion. Her book, Hijab Street Style, was a bestseller in Indonesia and Malaysia, and she's also the author of Brain, Beauty, Belief. think I've got about one of those, 1 out of 3. The last one. Okay, Dianne was chosen as one of Asia's 30 under 30 by Forbes magazine. And one more thing, she has 4.9 million Instagram followers. I've got 936. That's just 936 people. So please give a round of applause to our wonderful panel. So the format of this evening is we are going to have an introductory remark by each of the panelists, followed by a discussion led by me, and then we will open it up to all of you for Q&A. And then to conclude, we will have Deanne and Reshma, who will be showing some looks from their collection. So I'd like to now kick off with the million-dollar question, or maybe the multi-billion-dollar question, as the Muslim clothing market has been valued at about 254 billion. That's the most recent one I've heard. How would you define modest fashion? And I would like to now give Professor Rena Lewis the floor.
Well, thank you, and thank you for that wonderful opening. I'd like to thank Ayah House for inviting me to be here. It's an honor to be on this esteemed panel. I'd like to thank Anna and everybody else here who's worked so hard to make this event possible. And I'm looking forward to hearing all of your thoughts at the latter part of the evening. I often get asked, what do I mean by modest fashion? And I tend to say that I use modest fashion as a catch-all category to refer to the many different ways in which women from different religious backgrounds and faith communities dress according to their understanding of religious and cultural codes of modest dress and behavior. And this includes forms of dress that cover parts of the body, but within any given religion, women may cover or not cover same or different parts of the body. So we would expect to see enormous variety. And like any form of dress and fashion, it changes across the span of a woman's life. Very few people dress the same at 18, at 48, at 68, at 98. And that can be to do with life phases, or changing spiritual interpretations or religious practices, and the vagaries of the fashion system. When I started researching this, I've been working on this for the last 2 decades, and when I started doing this research and I said, oh, I'm looking at religion and fashion, people just laughed or said, you know, that's a contradiction in terms. If you Googled modest fashion 15 years ago, you might get taken to one of my very dull academic articles. Now you'll get taken straight to the fashion media and to the selling pages of high-end and high-street fashion brands. So, as we've just heard, it's an enormous market category now, and the fashion industry globally has woken up to the value of Muslims as consumers for fashion and lifestyle. This isn't surprising. Muslims are globally a growing and youthful demographic, but also as a global demographic that is multi-ethnic and based in every country in the world, there will be as many varieties as there are commonalities. And one of the other things that I would say about modest fashion now as a market, one of the reasons why the global brands are interested is because marketers, marketing professionals, have talked up Muslims as a segment. And that is building on the fact that designers and the pioneering designers and digital influencers have reached critical mass. And that's what's being recognized. So on one hand, I think the mainstream interest in Muslim consumers and in modest fashion as an aesthetic category provides opportunities for those people who've been pioneering work in that area, and it potentially is a threat to market share. So it's a very interesting moment. I'll stop.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And now Coulson, please.
And good evening, everyone. So how would I define modest fashion? I suppose to some degree I would reiterate what Professor Rena Lewis has said. I don't think modest fashion can be defined by one, singular garment necessarily. And for different women, it means different things. For some women, it's the hemlines, how long or how short, wearing the hijab, wearing the niqab. So there are different limits and different interpretations of what modest fashion means for different women. I suppose of recently what we're seeing this movement, and it does stem mainly around Islamic fashion and what Islam defines as modest fashion. We're seeing Muslim pioneers that are bringing modest fashion to the platform. But it's opening it up to women of other faith, whether they be Jewish, whether they be Christian. People choose to dress modestly for work, age, or just their sense of style. It is becoming a lot more accessible. I think modest fashion has always been around, and I truly believe this. I think garments what we define today as modest have always been around. The only difficulty has been that the woman who chooses to dress modestly would have to look hard for these clothing items. Whereas now it's a lot more accessible. There are brands that are specifically designed to cater for this market. So yeah, in terms of if there is one specific definition, my opinion is that there isn't.
Thank you very much, Kulsum. And now, Reshma, please take the floor.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Well, for me, I think due to my own heritage, my own Muslim heritage, being modest and wearing clothes in a certain way has always been something that I've been born and brought up with. And, since I've been designing for like 20 years now, there's always been elements of the collection that are more modest than others. And I think that's the thing, the interpretation of modest is just so varied. So what I would think is modest, somebody else would think is not modest, and another person would think is very modest. So I've always found that it's quite a vague interpretation, and even with what's kind of been interesting is when I launched online, the kind of customers that my product was appealing to. So I thought it would be more for a British Asian demographic, and I was very wrong, and that's why I turned from being a British Asian brand to a mainstream brand, where I realized that, having a long sleeve, having a slightly higher neckline, having a longer length was actually appealing to a British customer. And I think that's what's kind of differentiated my product as well, even, selling on somewhere like John Lewis, because it's approaching and appealing to a different audience, which I wouldn't necessarily have got on my own website. So I think it's a really interesting topic, and I think the interpretations are so varied. And even, directly within your own family, like my mom is now wearing a hijab, my sister is now wearing a hijab, a lot of my friends are wearing a hijab, and it's become a very personal thing in terms of how you interpret that. And then do you wear it or not wear it, and do you still see yourself as modestly dressed compared to your peers, compared to your family, compared to your friends? So for me, it's actually very personal in terms of how it's being interpreted right now. And I come from a generation, actually, where we didn't wear how modest wear is being worn now as well. So it's quite interesting how the younger generations now are wearing modest wear. And they are more modest than my generation was when I was at university or when I was at that stage. So, yeah, I think it's nice, and I've always had that as part of my ethos in my product. But as I'm not a modest, I don't see myself as a modest wear brand, which I think is what is interesting, because I see that most brands are either modest wear or not modest wear, and then now they're mainstream brands adding a modest element, whereas I've just been a brand that has done both from the start. And it's not something that I've done consciously to be increasing my turnover, it's just my design ethic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reshma. And now, Dian, we'd really like to hear from you.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank to Asia House and London Book Fair and Backcraft Indonesia to invite me here. In my opinion, simply, modest fashion is the evolution of Muslim fashion. We used to have a kind of Muslim fashion. We used to say it as a Muslim fashion, but I think right now it's evolving to modest fashion because it reached bigger markets, and also it's evolving to a style that easy to interpret to everyone who even wear the headscarf, or even the one that not wearing the headscarf. And I think as well, modest fashion refers to clothing that are less skin revealing and loose and not non-transparent clothing. And right now, I think there's a lot of mainstream brand as well who also starts to embracing this market, because I think right now there's not much differentiation between the modest fashion itself and the mainstream fashion. And I think from there people can styling do the styling and then mix and match based on what they wear daily. So I think, yeah, it's an evolution of Muslim fashion itself.
Well, thank you. Oh, would you like to?
Can I?
Yeah, of course.
Sorry. I think what's so interesting about what you've all said and what our two designers at the end there said is that there's a category shift. So you don't define yourself as a modest brand, and one of the things that's driving your sales are non-Muslim consumers who want different forms of cover. And I used to always hear from Muslim consumers that the fashion industry isn't meeting our needs, and that was completely true. But most women in the world feel that the fashion industry isn't meeting their needs. You know, if you're a fat teenager, there's not much on the market for you. So in a way, what's happened is that the different profile means that other consumers can find what you want. And I think your point is so interesting because it points to a category shift from Muslim fashion to modest fashion as a mainstream niche. And that has market implications and also social implications. So I think that's incredibly interesting. I'm taking notes and learning. Sorry.
No, that was...
Can I just add something as
Yep,
well?
please do. This is a conversation.
You touched on the point of saying how fashion was different during, whilst, you know, we were growing up.
Yeah.
And I completely agree.
Yeah.
And I think this is key. Reshma's touched on a key point. This is why modest fashion is growing into what it is, because it's twofold. One, the demographics of the young Muslims, especially in this country, you know, the millennials, they are more religiously inclined.
Definitely.
You know, and they're also more religious than our parents probably, or their parents probably were, because there's a shift from having the cultural beliefs to now having sound religious beliefs, and therefore the choices they are making are, you know, choices that they're making. It's not because their parents are saying, oh, you have to don a hijab, or you have to wear an abaya. And therefore, there is a need for fashionable modest wear.
But also it is something that is religiously driven. Do you recognize that as something religiously?
Absolutely.
Because of the Muslims are the ones who kind of influence the entire modest fashion revolution, if we can.
I mean, absolutely. It is driven by the Muslims who are choosing to dress modestly, fashionably as well. And it's you know, interlinking those two things together. They don't need to be two different elements of a garment. They want something that's fashionable, they want something that's modest. And you know, I'm sure you're seeing that through your consumers in terms of what they're choosing to wear.
And I think there's different definitions in, as I was saying, in modest. So when I went to Dubai and did press a cover, when I actually went there, before I went, I said, okay, what is the definition? And they had like a manual on it. This is the definition of modest. I was like, okay, let's be really clear. So obviously, no short dresses, no cleavage, okay. Sheer. Now, sheer is a really, you know, so I think that's a really grey area. So a lot of my product is sheer. I do a lot of sheer sleeves. And I think this is a really grey area because you get, and I see that some girls wear hijab and then they have sheer sleeves. And I personally wear sheer sleeves. And then I have other customers who would then line that area. So we consciously, because of the manual, then lined or took leotards or whatever and covered the neck area and the sleeve area. But then when we got there and we saw other designers and the product that they were displaying, I was like, okay, I didn't really need to line that. Didn't really need to do that. So I think, you know, it's just such a grey area, and I think everyone's definition is so different. And I think that's kind of, it's, you know, what I would probably define as fairly modest, you would probably say, that's definitely not modest. Do you know what I mean? So I think, you know, it's quite interesting, you know, and I think that's, and I think the option is being able to do both and have both and wear it how you want.
Yeah, I also think that probably the modest fashion itself grows hand in hand with the culture, based on the culture in each country,
totally.
because I think all the Muslim women in the world dress differently based on their culture. Like in Indonesia, they love to wear colors, bright colors and details and styling and everything, while in the Middle East, they normally use darker colors. And in the UK or in the US, they normally reveal their neck and then half of the arms and everything. So I think it goes hand in hand with the culture itself.
And I think that is really true, and I think that nuance, I mean, this is why it's so fabulous hearing from designers, because you're actually crafting the garment on the body, and of course you've got this experience as well, Coulson, which is, you know, maybe it needs to be lined to here, or to here, or not at all, but etc. And within a given culture, there'll be variations as well. And of course, it depends on where you're buying that garment for. If it's for a women-only party,
Yes.
but then again,
Yes.
there will be women who wouldn't wear sheer at a women-only party either. You know, these things are always so nuanced.
I mean, when there's women-only parties, there's often, you know, in the Middle East when I've sold or whatever, they can wear what they really want to wear, and it won't be modest at all because it's women-only. But then there are other, you know, there are the other events and other things where they would still totally cover up, even though it's women-only. So it is down to cultural and really personal taste.
And also sometimes that's about age. And I wanted to ask Deanne, because you started as a young designer from a family business, and you had a lot of young followers online and a lot of young consumers. And your consumers have grown up with you, but do you see a difference with the younger ones that are coming along in terms of your range, the different age groups?
Yeah, of course. I think the Muslim fashion itself used to be very conservative, not much styling, not much colors, but now it's evolving. And then from the younger followers from my Instagram, for example, they start to adapt the mainstream fashion to their style. So they also mix and match the trends from what they find in the runway, in the catwalk, in the fashion week, what's trending, and they start to adapt it and then mix and match with their headscarf. So I think it's simply also influenced by the mainstream fashion.
I mean, all my questions are thrown out. But you were all talking about personal interpretation, which is so important to how we express ourselves as well. So I wanted to ask you about the topic of empowerment and female empowerment that is actually now associated with modest fashion. You know, women are kind of reclaiming some quite dangerous narratives out there when we're talking about Muslim women in particular. So I'd just like you to comment on that in terms of the Muslim world, but also more generally when you're talking about different faiths, feeling more empowered that they can be stylish and covered up at the same time. Oh, anyone can call some.
I mean, you know, the modern Muslim woman is not a monolith demographic. So she, like any other consumer, you know, has desires to look a certain way, to dress a certain way. And the key is in retailers and designers knowing this and recognizing this. And I think the moment they do and that they're able to, they are able to capture that consumer. It isn't a religious specific thing. I mean, you know, yes, it's driven by the fact that the modest fashion industry is driven by the Muslim woman at this moment in time. But it does, you know, like we have an example with the Modist. I don't know if everyone's heard of it yet.
Yeah, the modist.com.
And you know, they don't specifically aim their product at the Muslim woman. It's at the woman who chooses to dress modestly. I mean, at the time where, you know, in my journey of work, where we were photographing modest wear, and the conversation we had is, do we put these models in a hijab because we are photographing an item of clothing that's supposed to represent the Muslim woman? And in the end, we decided, you know, some models did and some models didn't. But, you know, you're making an assumption on a large part there that everyone who wears a hijab are the only people who choose to dress modestly. So I don't know if I've answered your question, if I've gone off on a tangent, but...
I love tangents. I think we all do. Would anybody like to jump in about female empowerment or any of those things that we kind of just mentioned? So fashion and female empowerment.
In my opinion, I think fashion and female empowerment is really related to each other. For example, here we have, as you know, maybe the first hijabi model, Halima Aden. I think she's one of the most inspiring figure for youngsters right now, for Muslim around the world. It makes them believe that she makes all the Muslims believe that we can do everything with our headscarf on. And also, as you know, that maybe some of you know Ibtihaj Muhammad. She's the first fencing athlete that wear headscarf. So I think it's really inspiring for a lot of people who wants to also be whoever they are with their headscarf on. And also imagine there's so many fields that haven't touched yet. As the first Muslimah who did this, who did that, who knows that in the future we have the first Muslimah who wear hijab that became an astronaut or anything. So I think there's still a lot of opportunities for us. And from there, I think music, fashion, art is a platform for us to empower each other without having to speak a lot of things. Yeah.
Well, in terms of female empowerment, I think just in terms of generally in clothing, if you can wear something that makes you feel strong and confident, and if it is a modest garment that makes you feel that and makes you feel more empowered that you're wearing something that is fitting the criteria of what, something that you want to wear, which is obviously quite hard to get previously. I think that's just a great thing. I think it's just being confident in what you wear and being yourself and being an individual, which I think really is becoming more and more relevant right now with how everybody's dressing and they're showing their signature and who they are through their clothes.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think when it comes to modest fashion, and particularly to Muslim modest fashion, which is the biggest segment, absolutely, as you say, one of the things that I often hear as an academic researcher and as someone who's not Muslim is, well, aren't women forced to wear a hijab or an abaya or whatever? And I would always say, yes, of course, there are circumstances where Muslim women in different parts of the world have very little choice about when, if, and how to cover, but don't imagine, and that's not right, but don't imagine for a minute that the way I dress when I walk down the street in London isn't also subject to surveillance and regulation and judgment and shaming in different ways. But also that within what is sometimes called a modest fashion movement, young women, or youngish women now, articulate a mantra of choice, that whether you see covering of any form as a religious obligation or adherence to social convention, it's not authentic if it's not freely chosen. And therefore what we see is a lot of Muslim women banding together with women from other faith backgrounds and secular women to protect women's rights to religious expression in whichever way they wish to do that, covered or not covered, covering or uncovering. And I think that's led to some very, very interesting activism around protecting rights to religious and spiritual expression as a protection of human rights. I think it's really interesting you mentioned Halima Aden, and of course in the UK people will be very rightly proud of Maria Idrissi for her H&M advert. And when these things happen, it's incredibly important, especially to young people, to have role models. And at the same time, it also singles out women wearing a headscarf as the only form of visible role model. And that goes to your point about how do you stage your fashion imagery. Because of course, there are lots of women from Muslim heritage who are models, who are astronauts, who are bus drivers, who are teachers, who are scientists, but they're not visibly distinctive, and therefore they don't get picked out. And I guess in a way, what I think is really interesting now is that more people of Muslim heritage are being visible in the fashion industry. So the Hadid sisters, the supermodels we were talking earlier, are now, out as women of Muslim heritage. And I find that incredibly important because it widens the frame of what Muslim can be and what Muslim looks like.
You're talking about, obviously, the sisters that have come out saying, yes, we are of Muslim heritage. It begs the question, was there a reason why they wouldn't have disclosed that initially? Or, is it something that you wouldn't talk about? I haven't always worn the hijab, and when I did choose to embrace the hijab, I was very conscious of the challenges that I could potentially face, and I didn't. I mean, I think, you worry about these things more so than you would do otherwise, but, I think it's this revolution, this movement that we are seeing is normalizing it. It's saying it's okay to be a hijabi woman because, you are in the limelight now, you are becoming mainstream, you can hold these positions, and it's something that you can be proud of. Not to say that we as individuals weren't proud of it, but how we were portrayed, or, when would you ever open a Vogue magazine and see a hijabi woman in there? When would you walk past Gap and look, oh look, there's a woman in a hijab there? All these things are, pushing this revolution along, and it's amazing. The movement is amazing, and businesses like these brands YSL, Dolce & Gabbana, they're all seeing this, and that's why everyone wants a slice of this pie now, because it's big and it's only projected to get bigger.
Well, I've got a slightly different opinion on that. So I've seen it the other way. I see it the other way now as well, where now not wearing a hijab within your Muslim community, you're literally can be spotted how many people in a room are not wearing a hijab now. When you go to like a Muslim function, like a wedding or, you know, a party or whatever it is. So it's actually gone the other way as well, where actually being a Muslim, and from that generation where we weren't wearing scarves at the time, my mother never wore it. My mum started wearing it now at 70. So it's kind of the other way now, where my mum is wearing it and my sister was wearing it, and my dad goes, so when are you going to wear it? You know, as a joke, because he knows it's going to be hard to get me to wear it. So it's like the joke in my family, when are you going to wear it? You know. So I think it goes both ways, you know, because I think there is, I think if you want to wear it and you're confident in wearing it and you believe in wearing it, then I think it's a really positive thing. But I also think that not wearing it and being Muslim is okay too.
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I'm just saying it from the other route, because actually people in my boat don't normally say it out loud.
Yeah, I mean, there is
slightly
so much.
controversial.
I mean, as you said, we're not monolithic. There's just so much diversity, but there's also a lot of pressure also attached to
it's almost a
to
pressure
Muslim
now, you know,
yeah,
because
to wear it or to not wear it. And
yeah,
I think
yeah,
they're both.
yeah.
But Rena wanted to just ask a question.
I wanted to ask on that, and I think Dianne wants to come in as well. What I think is really interesting is that's a community change where you become more conspicuous as there is a sort of a culture shift in the way that women around you look.
Yes.
Has it made any difference in the fashion industry, in your professional life, with Muslims and non-Muslims? It might not.
No, I think there's always been, I think what I've found since, there's always been an issue around the branding of my label being Reshma. Now, actually, it's kind of more of a Hindu name than a Muslim name, to be frank, but, you know, I was named it, so that was that. But there's always been a thing about the ethnicity of having a name, and I was in a board meeting about my brand yesterday, and my non-exec said, oh, you know, we've always had this issue with the branding being of Muslim origin. And I'm sitting there going, well, actually, it's a Hindu name. So it's not even a Muslim name, it's a Hindu name. But there's an issue around more about branding and being ethnic, or being maybe because she sees it, because I'm Muslim, she just presumed it was a Muslim name. But having a Muslim name and then having my type of product making me more of an ethnic brand, when actually I'm not an ethnic brand, I'm a mainstream brand in the sense that anybody and everybody is buying my product, from English to Middle Eastern to Indian, and it's always been that way actually. Even when I had a store sitting in Green Street, I always had a mix of customers, because my product is so fusion and it's so mixed in terms of, and it's probably gone more mainstream now. So I think I've had more of an issue around the name actually, and you know, having the same product and changing the name, having it restyled and seeing the change of perspective on that product, which is exactly the same as a Reshma product, has been really interesting.
It's now a modest fashion lens that's
So
been projected.
I've had it more around the naming than, I wouldn't say me personally, I think maybe people think I'm Hindu because of my name anyway. So I don't
know Muslims
probably
called
get
Reshma.
that. Yeah,
So.
there's a few, but there's a lot of
okay.
Hindu Reshmas and there's Muslim Reshmas as well.
Could I just bring in Dianne as well, just to give us more of a glimpse about the Indonesian market, because it would be really nice to get an overview of what it was like maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and to the present day.
Actually, modest fashion is not something new in Indonesia. It's already established since 35 years ago. We have our senior designers that already showcase their designs in the catwalk and in the fashion week in Indonesia, and it works really well. But at that time, it used to be only at the exclusive market, only for the one that on the fashion shows, and then the exclusive boutique, something like that. It's not really reachable for the mass market. But 10 years ago, the hijabers community was established, was founded, and it took a big part in the growth of Muslimah community in Indonesia, especially for the modest fashion. they influence Muslimah to dress up really well, inspiring how to do fashion, and give a variety of hijab style tutorials. And I think from there, in the last 10 years, many influencers transferred those information into books. And then also, back then, there was a big demand for books and magazines. That's how many books and magazines about Islamic fashion. But now, modest fashion is mainly advertised and viewed on social media. So I think community also took big parts of the growth of the modest fashion itself. The hijabers community contains like 20 to 30 Muslimah from many backgrounds. Some of them are fashion designers, even lawyers, even doctors, and they show the Indonesian community that they change people's perception that we can be everything with our hijab on, and then also we can also still be fashionable, and sometimes we also share about the tutorial hijab and then how to mix and match styles, and from there people start to change their mind about the Muslim fashion itself. And there's a lot of new brands, new fashion brands that are launching their products, and also big brands right now also targeting in modest fashion market. So I think it's how we communicate with the people to show the real definition of the modest fashion itself. And I think the message is delivered really well, because right now there's so many people start to accept the modest fashion itself, and then give appreciation about that.
And I'm using a word you used. You said there's an evolution with the modest fashion market, and it's really interesting to see the growth in that market with publishing. You mentioned publishing and your own books, and in this country we had Dina Torkia publishing Modestly, and that was like a #1 bestseller on Amazon. So it's really interesting to see how it's growing, and even the demand around it. There is even demand for personal stylists who are modestly styling Muslims and non-Muslim women. And this is something that you picked up with the San Francisco exhibition. There was a catalogue for that, so that was quite interesting.
Because we
no, don't talk about me. But yeah, that wasn't
we managed to prevail upon Remona to write a really wonderful chapter for us about
not a leading
fashion styles. No, but this is...
But it's an interesting concept, and that was something that you came up with.
Well, this is one of the things that really interests me, because it starts with designers, and it used to be print magazines, and then social media, blogs and social media. And one of the things I'm really interested in, especially because I'm at London College of Fashion, where we cover every component of fashion, from design to marketing to management to photography to journalism. I'm really interested in the ramifications of modest fashion, and in this case Muslim modest fashion, on the wider professional circuit of the industry. Both sort of, who do you have as models? When you do a shoot, do you want your models to be sort of jutting their hips, or do you want a different sort of pose? Like, do you go with what is industry standard, or do you need to have something slightly different? But also, as consumers, when you go to a store and you can get fashion styling, I mean, you've written about this, both on the high street and at the high end, do you have a stylist that will understand that nuance of, do you want a sleeve that's blocked in? Do you want something with a jacket that you can then take off if you're in a women-only space?
Layering as a whole philosophy of layering, isn't there? Fashion.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting there is that sort of modest fashion knowledge isn't only the property of people who are themselves dressing modestly. You know, men design clothes for women, women design clothes for men. Women design clothes that's not the aesthetic that they wear, but because they're a professional designer. So I'm really interested then if we're going to find that these sorts of knowledges become a value in the fashion industry.
Did you want to respond to that?
I mean, I do think it will happen. We see now, there are a lot of, there are male and female. I'm just thinking back to the shoots that we did that were modest and the stylists that we had on board. And neither of them were specific to the modest industry, because it's still, whilst in Indonesia, for instance, it's been there for years. Here, I know there have been brands for a long time, but in terms of it becoming a mainstream thing, it's a relatively new movement, I'd say. So I don't, I I think it will happen. There are gaps in the creative industry that will be filled with, modest-specific roles, if that makes any sense. But, I think at the moment, a lot of it is trying to, it's a bit of guesswork, and it's a bit about saying, okay, well, what will work? Because, there's this whole, is Shia too halal or not halal? Or, what are we working on? And there is a bit of trial and error. I think we will get there. There are consultancies that are being set up, similar to what we do, where, you talk to brands and you're trying to address the needs and identify what it is that the Muslim consumer needs. So it will happen.
Actually, I did do a shoot just before I went to Dubai for the event. And I thought, okay, do I need a modest stylist, Because I don't wear, and what is that? And also because I don't wear a hijab myself, it was more for me about the head coverage. I mean, the rest you can do, but so it was more about the head coverage. So I thought, okay, it'd be quite fun to do this as well, and it would be, I'd learn from that as well. So I did take on a modest kind of somebody who wears a hijab stylist, and I said, let's kind of work together on this and do this. So it was quite interesting. I mean, in the way that she kind of styled each product very similar in terms of the dress, but it was more to do with the headgear really more for me than anything else. Whether it was a turban or whether it was just a simple stole wrapped around the head, whether it was a full hijab, whether it was a cap. And I really enjoyed that, and I think it did add a different element to the shoot that I probably would not have done myself, especially the more kind of urban and more kind of casual and more street that you're so great at. That's not really my thing, so it was actually great to have someone look at my product and style it in a different way. So that was quite an eye-opener, and that worked because we won an award over there, so it was well worth doing. But I think there is a need for that if you are targeting an audience that do want to cover their hair and they want to see different ways of wearing, different ways of covering, not just obviously a straightforward hijab.
So a hijab stylist is a big thing now. It's a massive growing trend, and people will book hijab stylists for weddings and parties.
Yes.
And so, you have your makeup artists who would do your hair once upon a time. Doesn't matter if you wear a hijab, you can get a hijab stylist in now. So, it's a niche that it is slowly filling up.
Well, it's also a way of building social diversity in the fashion industry. Sorry, Dian.
Yeah, I think I agree with that because even though right now in social media it's really hyped that if you search for the hashtag hijab tutorial, there's a lot of things come out, and even though in YouTube there's a lot of hijab tutorials over there, and the viewers reach 1 million viewers and something like that. I think it's social media is one of the platform who really useful for everyone, for them who look for a new style, how to do it. There's a lot of choice, so many styles that we can choose from there.
And just as a final question before we open up to the audience, what changes or developments do you see for the future of modest fashion?
I think
She's thought about this.
I think there's there's so many opportunities from there. I see more opportunities rather than limitations. There are still more areas in the global fashion industry that the modest fashion industry haven't attained yet, like maybe sportswear, swimwear, office wear, or something like that. Even though there are also and it's also the modest fashion. It's also right now becoming the modest lifestyle. It's not only about fashion, but also lifestyle. Right now in Indonesia, it's expanding not only in fashion, but also in beauty, in makeup. We have halal makeup, and it sells really well because they think that it's safe for them. And also, not only that, we have also halal tourism. So people who travel wearing modest fashion and then take pictures everywhere, it's also important for them. And then also, we are sure in the future everything can be Muslimah friendly as well. And for example, right now I think big brands also approaching to the modest fashion market. I think it's a sign that the modest fashion itself starts to be accepted by the global fashion market, not only for hijabi, but also for non-Muslim as well.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think now it's become so mainstream, and I think the modest kind of sums up where it's really at right now. And that even with workwear, I mean, even though, you know, you can categorize it and then have a collection saying modest workwear, actually, if you go and take elements from every website and pull it together, you will pull together a modest outfit in 10 minutes. So I feel that all the elements are there already. I think it's all down to styling, how things are being pulled together. And I think influencers, you know, like Diane, are pulling it together in a really strong way. And I think that's where it's changed. I think it's more about styling. And this is what I was saying when we got the models to ready. I mean, mine were dressed in 5 minutes, and I had a couture gown, and yours took about 15 minutes, because there's so many layers, and it was all to do with the styling, and that is part of that aesthetic. So I think it's great that, you know, you can go to a Marks and Spencer's and find now a long-sleeved dress just because they're trying to fulfill these gaps, because there are plenty of people that aren't Muslim that want a long-sleeved dress. So I think it's becoming more of a global acceptance of not always wanting to reveal.
Brilliant, thank you.
So I suppose it just echoes what the ladies have already said. My vision moving forward, I mean, obviously the industry is set to, you know, increase by 50% by 2020. The mainstream sites where, you know, people do choose to shop from, you know, names that we've all heard of. What would be good is for them to streamline the shopping experience for the woman who chooses to dress modestly. And that is something, you know, something that is something that I'm quite passionate about. So fingers crossed, I'll have some input in that. But, you know, that is where I see the industry going. You know, you want to be able to open up one of these websites and just click on the modest wear section, and you know they've curated it for you already.
So I've seen that now.
Oh,
so we're creating.
Tell me where.
Well, we're just now. We're creating our new website right now. So we're launching that in 2 months, and we've been looking, and all of a sudden, on all these mainstream sites, at the bottom it says modest.
Search term.
You know,
So
and
it's
I
like
was
a
just
search
shocked.
term,
You know,
yeah.
because in a way, we were going slightly the other way, where we've been slightly more ethnic as a brand, and we were slightly not pulling away, but not in a way highlighting it because we've become more mainstream. But actually, they're going back to what we're doing and putting this term modest in as a category. And I was like, well, we're already doing this. Just use that word, modest.
It's got selling power.
So it is happening, and I think within 18 months, I think it will probably be a category on most women's wear websites. So I think it'll be very easy for you to shop.
Thanks, Foster.
And Professor Rena Lewis.
Oh,
Sorry, I'm giving you your full title.
I'm honoured. I agree with everything. I think the normal churn of the globalized fashion industry means that some of this will go off trend. But also, these things continue. I mean, I'm wearing sparkly socks. I love sparkly socks. When they're in fashion, I have to stockpile them because in a year's time, there won't be any in the shops. And I think to some extent, it's about this crossover market that you've all been talking about, that if the brands listen, the mainstream brands, they will keep, it will be mainstreamed. They will keep an evening dress with a selection of sleeve options in their range because it's clear that all sorts of women want that. It may be called modest at the moment for, you know, search engine optimization.
It is definitely a trend.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do feel that it's a trend that everyone is just following and not even necessarily believing or thinking. They're just doing it because their friends are doing it. I do feel there is a slight element of that.
So do you think that maybe the modest term is going to disappear and it will just become...
It may
No,
disappear.
I think just be accepted.
It may be accepted.
Yeah.
And it may disappear. And one of the reasons it may disappear is that it's always been a contentious term. Women who dress modestly sometimes say, I don't like that word because it implies that I'm very humble or that I'm not going to wear bright colors. I'm a feminist. You know, I'm covering the way I think I should cover, but I don't believe that I shouldn't put my voice out there or my opinions. And other people want to reclaim it. And of course, some of the early brands used the word modest rather than Muslim or Christian or Jewish fashion because they realized they were reaching consumers from outside their faith community. But you know, the language in fashion is constantly changing. the same garment is given different. How many ways can you describe crop trousers? There's 500 different terms for it. So it's also up to consumers to keep making the case that they want those items, and then that creates opportunity for the brands who are doing it.
Thank you so much. Actually, I went to a Jewish wedding recently, and they had bought their dresses from Muslim modest wear collections, which is really interesting. I'd love to open it now up to all of you, to the floor. If you have any burning questions, I believe there's there's already one up there, a microphone going around. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the very stimulating conversation. Please bear with me because I have 3 selfish burning questions.
Oh, I'm really sorry. Could we keep it to just one, and then I can come back to you so that everyone has a chance to ask a question? Could we just keep it to one?
The number one is, Dian, how can I buy your menswear line from here in the UK?
Okay. That's an easy one, actually. Yeah. Oh. So, Dian.
Thank you so much for the question. So actually, Dian Pelangi has 4 labels. The first one is Dian Pelangi Privé. It's for private collection. And then Dian Pelangi Krama for exclusive collection. And then casual, Dian Pelangi Nob, and then Dian Pelangi Men. But unfortunately, it's not available yet in the UK. But you can purchase online on dianpelangi.com.
Got that? Great, thank you. I'm sorry, I should have specified it. Could we just keep it to one question at the moment, and then we can come back to you? Are there any other questions in the room? There's a lady in the front, in the second row.
Thank you so much for the talk. I'd like to ask, do you think that modest fashion... do you think that modest fashion could be mixed somehow with unisex fashion?
Good question.
Because we haven't really talked about men, have we, in modest fashion? Yeah. So, unisex fashion.
I've got an answer, but I'm not a designer. You go first.
Everyone has to answer.
I have to think about that one.
Think it through, everybody. So, Rena, please. Oh, sorry, Dian.
I will answer a little bit. I think from the perspective of Islam, the modest fashion for women itself, it shouldn't following the style of a man's style. It should be different. But actually, from styling or mix and match, I think it could be, it's possibly, but I think for the men's style, we couldn't explore a lot of style from there. But it's possibly, but we'll see maybe in the future.
Okay. Possibility.
I think that within a number of religious traditions, having clothing that is understood to demarcate differences between the genders, understood as two, is often the case. But that doesn't mean that consumers might not buy something from the men's range and wear it. No designer controls what happens to their garments. And in casual wear, when you think about T-shirts and hoodies, and knitwear, there's actually a lot of crossover within people's ranges. But I do think that menswear is potentially going to be one of the growing sectors in the modest fashion market, because up until now there's been less, but we are now seeing in some of the modest fashion shows, a menswear segment. So there is scope there for growing.
Thank you for your question. And sorry, who should we go to first? There was a lady there, I think she put her hand up first, in the green, and then we'll come to you.
Thank you very much for that excellent discussion. I was wondering if the Me Too movement has had any impact on the modest fashion industry.
Excellent question. Thank you very much. Who would like to leap in? It's such a, it's something you have to mull over a little bit.
It's an interesting question. And I suppose we have to be careful how we answer it, because we're suggesting, Me Too, so the movement has obviously been, very thought-provoking for everyone around the world, seeing it, and, all these stories that we're hearing. How does that tie in with modest fashion? Does it mean that people are more inclined to, it's difficult, so I want to choose my words carefully in terms of what it is that I'm saying. But has it had an implication? I'd like to say that they're two different things. I don't think that, one is linked or in any way related to the other. The Me Too movement, the reason why it started is unfortunate, that those events are unfortunate. And I don't think it's got anything to do with the way people dress or anything like that. I don't know if I've answered your question or if that's what you were asking.
I think the values of the Me Too movement about supporting women's rights to sexual autonomy, to freedom, to not be objectified. I think there are a lot of people involved in modest fashion, design and media, and as consumers and activists who would share many of those values and have been involved in many of those campaigns. I think this is where the term modest again comes in as difficult, because does that imply if you say I am not a modest dresser or she's not dressed modestly, does that imply, she then the whore of Babylon? And whatever happens to her, she deserves because of the way she's dressed. And, a lot of people would say no. And that's where that mantra of choice comes in as well, which is about respecting women's choices and not making the way that women dress be the determinant of how they're treated. But I think there is a real tension there, as for the rest of the world. So there's an intersect and there's a tension.
Thank you. And I think there's a question, I know you, in purple, and then the lady in the hat. So there's the lady over there.
Hi, thank you so far for this evening. It's been really great. Quick question. What do you think the effect of sustainable fashion will be on the modest world?
Thank you very much for that question. Sustainable fashion, what is the impact?
Well, I think with modest fashion, with the way things are layered and the way that we were talking about, remember at the back, and I was saying, well, that jacket could actually then be worn with a pair of jeans and you can wear it. So I think the way that modest fashion is, when it's done with the more layering and more in that styling, I think there's a lot of reusage in how the products are being worn. And I think there was a lot of that kind of conversation when I went to Dubai at Pret a Cover as well, about sustainable and being able to reuse and be re-wearing. And I think, we did one outfit and it was styled in like 5 ways, or one jacket that was worn in styled in 5 ways. So I think it is all starting to interconnect and be quite relatable. So I think that's probably where that can go and where that will further go.
And just on that, in terms of sustainable fashion as well, soon a conversation will be happening. Well, is modest fashion also ethical? Islamically, we have, if that's what we're using as a line, then we have a responsibility to make sure that the clothes that we are wearing are ethically sourced, ethically produced, from the fabric to the manufacturing, all these elements. And, I do think it's a matter of time before those conversations start coming along as well.
It's something I hear a lot from my research participants, that modest fashion consumers want sustainable and ethically produced fashion, just like other consumers. And modest fashion designers will increasingly say that it's part of their religious ethics, their spiritual ethics. And I hear this from different world faith backgrounds as well, that it's not just about how you're covered, but what was the human cost and the environmental cost of producing that. I would say that for modest fashion, where there are many new startup brands, fashion is a hard industry. The failure rate is high. And to build in sustainability when you're a new company and you've got a small production line is also really, really difficult. So, but it is also part of the mission and the marketing of a number of brands. Just like halal food companies are now more committed to cruelty-free farming. It's also about the consumer change that's driving it.
Thank you very much. Excellent responses to an excellent question. There was a lady here in the hat, and then there's a lady at the back. We've only got a few minutes. Oh, and another lady over there. We've just got a few minutes left. Oh my gosh. Let's try and be as quick as possible.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for the interesting discussion. You talked about some issues of the branding. I want to know what's the role of branding in making the modest fashion a billion-dollar business.
Big question.
Is that me? You want to take it?
Should we just have one response and then we can do it that way?
The fact that we now have these figures for the value of the Muslim spend on apparel and now drilling down to the Muslim spend on modest apparel is because of marketing activity. And that is mainly driven by profit brands are doing this because they think that they can make money from it, and also by a desire on the part of many people who are professional marketers and brand consultants to include social diversity, which includes religious diversity, into their workplace, into what they do. And on one hand, I think to be constructed as a consumer segment can be a good thing, and on the other hand, it also means you're targeted by companies in a different sort of way. So I think that's the reason why it's happening, is the professional activity.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And would you be able to go all the way at the back? There's a lady over there. Sprint over there. And then I believe there was a lady at the back over there as well, yes.
Sorry. Thank you so much for such a great discussion. So I research cultural diversity and also in particular culture in the Middle East. And when I was traveling around the west coast of Saudi Arabia, I went and I saw in like old museums and things like that, the fashion they used to wear back in the day, maybe 200 to like 1,000 years ago. And what surprised me was that it's so vibrant, it's colorful, you have all these beautiful designs, which surprised me because you would think going back would be even more modest than it is today. So my question is, do you think the fashion industry and the rise of modest fashion is going to tap into that heritage and maybe expose the heritage that we have in beautiful fashion back in the day to the future?
I truly hope so. It's about doing the full circle, going back to our roots and, where it all started and where it all stems from. I think modest fashion, though, I think at the moment is probably more about the cuts rather than the fabrics and the colors. Well, that's my opinion at least. I mean, you just need to take a look on somewhere like the Modist where you can see, this gorgeous Valentino gown that's probably like red and plum or something. And it's modest, and it's people who will choose, I suppose religiously, I know what you're saying, that, you see women donning the black abaya, and that is what we see a lot of in terms of a modest Muslim woman. But now I do think there is a shift happening, and that it's not going to be the only option available. Some people might have a firm belief that that is what they're supposed to be wearing, but that's a different conversation altogether. But I hope so, yes.
Sorry, I'm making it all so short and we can't hear from all the panelists, but it's just because we only have a couple of minutes left. And then there was a question, just a lady over, she was waving some glasses. It's really interesting about religion and culture, the crossover with fashion. I really find that fascinating.
Hello, I just want to say thank you very much. Very interesting discussion. And I was struck by Professor Lewis's comment that all cultures subject women to surveillance. It's just as true of the West as it is anywhere else. But I wonder what the panel thinks about the girls of Revolution Street in Iran who object to the veil, and they're fighting against the veil. It's very difficult for them, and they're opposed not only by the religious establishment, but by their sisters. I wonder what you think about that.
Who would like to answer that one?
Yeah, you take it.
So Coulson will address that one.
So in my opinion, religion isn't supposed to be oppressive. Islam is not about oppressing women. There is this very, religion, culture, people do mix it up. It's happened for generations, and it continues to be more prevalent in some cultures than others. So the women who are objecting, and I do think, I think there is just this case of not having this clear understanding of what, the value of women in their religion. Islam is not about oppressing women.
Yes, definitely more of a cultural issue in different parts of the world.
I'm so... Yeah. I think I would say, just to wind up on that.
Yeah, we have to wind up on that,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think covering has been part of all cultures historically. As well.
Yeah, and I think it's also about different political contexts as well, in which women and women's bodies and women's appearance become mobilized by different political factions for a number of different purposes. Anyway, I know you've got to do the awful thing now.
I'm being really horrible now. Unfortunately, I won't be able to answer all the questions, but you can, of course, speak to the panelists afterwards when we conclude. We would like to move on to our fashion looks now from Deanne and Reshma's collections. So, Deanne, would you like to start it off by bringing up our elegant models?
Do we stay here?
Yeah.
Do we stay here?
We stay here.
I was just going to stay here.
I'd like to invite the models to come up.
Yeah, so the first look, this one is from my latest collection. The name is Social Love. It's inspired by the social media, the hype of the social media itself. That's why there's a lot of typography in here, like in the scarf, in the belts, and in the prints as well. You can find a lot of typography because I want to show that right now the Muslimah itself starts to speak out a lot about their beliefs in the social media. And then also I use pink colors because I inspired by the likes on Instagram. Whenever you press the like, it turns pink, it turns red. So that's why I use a lot of pink colors in here. And then as what we discussed before in the backstage, this look is about styling because this collection is showcased in the New York Fashion Week 2019. And then also I want people to explore from this look, like they can use this look with the headscarf, even without the headscarf, because right now we start to using the word modest. So I want all the people to embrace it. Even some of them are interested to wear the tops only or the pants only. They can mix and match, and then they can adjust it with their style. And then also the materials. This one is silk, and then also we also use handprint for the pattern in here. And also for this collection, we collaborate with Adidas Indonesia as the shoes for the shoes and the bags in some of the collections, because we want to present more sporty looks. Because in social media we are really outspoken about anything, and I want people to feel that energy in these collections. Thank you. And for the second look,
Thank you. I love that jacket.
Yeah, for the second look, it's more formal. I use a blazer and then also a little bit of styling with the belt and then the outer skirt. And then also, as you can see, there's a lot of typography in the scarf because, then again, I inspired by the caption in the social media on how we can express ourselves from social media. And also, the prints is, actually, this is one of the collaborations with one of the students from London College of Fashion, one of the students of Professor Rena Lewis. It's Nelly Rose. We collaborate together to create prints. Nelly Rose is one of the pattern and textile designers. She went to Indonesia, to Pekalongan, where the workshop, where my workshop is, and then there she learned about batik and Indonesian prints for 3 months, and then we create patterns together, and this is one of them. And it's also hand printed by hands using batik techniques, and I think. I think it shows different type of batik because I think a lot of people knows that batik normally have really small patterns, but right now it's but we create together a contemporary batik that hopefully would suitable for a more global market. And this is the second look with more sporty looks. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. That was so interesting and brilliant. Please, another round of applause for the models as well, and
Thank you.
Deanne explaining it. Thank you. And now, Reshma, please take the floor and explain your two looks and the inspiration behind them.
So this is one of my ready-to-wear pieces. We retail this on our own store, and we sell this in the Middle East. It's all hand-beaded, hand embroidered, made in a soft tulle. And we have some customers who would stitch this down or we stitch it down for them. And some customers maybe would have like a lined sleeve, etc., added if they wanted to be more modest. That all comes down to the degree of modesty that you want to have. But it's really easy to wear, really comfortable, drapes really well, and is one of our best-selling pieces, actually. Yeah. I feel bad not helping her. This is one of our couture gowns. So this can be worn with a big net petticoat underneath and be really full. It's all hand embroidered. All our product is kind of handcrafted, hand embroidered, mainly made by women, all ethnically made in India. This was actually inspired by Oriental flora. I showed this piece at Paris Couture Week, and then I took this piece to Dubai as well. So more modest, you would have it lined. We have a beautiful cape veil that goes with it as well, that you could wear on a clip at the back or have it coming to the front if it was for an actual wedding. The theme, as I said, was Oriental flora, so it was inspired by the blossom trees, the flora, and geometric patterns that kind of run through the kind of Japanese patterns and fabrics and textiles. So this is one of the pieces that we had made, and then it's all kind of silk organza and a very big train at the back that you can see here. So obviously this is many, many hours of work. And we did a whole collection around this for Paris. All right, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reshma and Deanne, for showing us your beautiful collections, and thank you again to the models for doing that so elegantly. And just to conclude now, a big thank you and a round of applause to our excellent panelists.